A historic summit addressing sex abuse in the Catholic Church is underway today. 190 leaders, including priests, bishops, cardinals, and representatives from all over the world, are attending this major meeting at the Vatican. Pope Francis spoke earlier, demanding action to address the global horrific scandal. Catholic leaders worldwide are facing mounting pressure to provide justice for abuse victims after decades of cover-ups. Cardinal Luis Tagal from the Philippines struggled to hold back tears while delivering the summit's keynote address.
The wounds of the risen Christ carry the memory of innocent suffering, but they also carry the memory of our weakness and sinfulness. If we want to be agents of healing, let us not reject any tendency that is part of worldly thinking that refuses to see and touch the wounds of others, which are Christ's wounds in the wounded people. Those wounded by abuse and the scandal need to be strong in faith in this moment.
All right, this is a historic meeting, and we want to bring you in-depth coverage, the likes that you cannot get anywhere else except for here on CBSN, CBS News. So we've asked Seth Doane to join us from Rome with extended coverage of the summit. So Seth, you've actually gotten new details on the meetings. What more can you tell us?
That's right, Vlad. Our colleague Nicky Batiste, who's been doing a lot of reporting on the domestic side of this clerical sex abuse scandals, just sat down with Blaise Cupich. He's the cardinal, the Archbishop of Chicago, and is on the organizing committee for this summit. They were wrapping up after the interview, and he told Nicky that the organizing committee has been asked now by the Holy Father, by Pope Francis, to stay behind and add an extra 2 days here in Rome to discuss the findings, to discuss this 4-day summit. The Pope has asked for concrete measures, not just condemnation of clerical sex abuse, but concrete measures. And this morning, to those who are gathered here, the 190 participants, about 114 of those are bishops, the Pope gave out a list of 21 points, and I wanted to mention a couple of those that were interesting. One of them, number 7, he says, establish specific protocols for handling accusations against bishops. Number 13, participation of lay experts in investigations into sexual and or power abuse. He talks about introducing rules for seminarians and candidates for the priesthood, helping them develop their human spiritual maturity, including psychological evaluations. And also to number 21, establish a group easily accessible for victims who want to report any crime. Such an organization, the Pope notes, should have a certain autonomy. Now, to discuss that, we brought in a good friend to CBS News, Father Mark Lewis, who is a Jesuit, a professor here at the Gregorian Pontifical University here in Rome. You have a unique perspective as a Jesuit, like the Pope, but also you've sat in these meetings before. Some of these points, one of them that the Pope discusses on this 21 point, seem quite elementary in some ways. He says, prepare a practical handbook. I think a lot of people would say, come on, aren't we past that point?
In some places we might be. The challenge, I think, is in some ways in understanding this meeting is that we're now moving to a universal level, the level of the universal church. So all of these things will have to be implemented at local level in different cultures and different languages with different resources that are available to the church there.
You've been in these meetings before. What is it like? You've got all these different language groups, you're listening to translators, people are coming from very different backgrounds?
A lot of different backgrounds, language differences, cultural differences, attitudes towards sexuality. So there's an awful lot of things that would be obstacles to come into a sort of universal one-size-fits-all plan. But I think these what it sounds like is the guidelines going forward then have to be brought into implementation locally.
What's interesting, a lot of these guidelines are quite familiar, particularly to an American priest. Many of these were put in place during the Dallas Charter 17 years ago, back in 2002. So what's happening here? You're trying to bring the rest of the church up to speed, and isn't this the type of organization that if it wants to do something, there's not a lot of wiggle room. Can't the Pope say, do this?
I think that's a little bit of the myth that's been going on, is that everything comes to the center and then the marching orders come from the center and out. But the world is a very different place from country to country. The resources that are available are very different from country to country. And there's an awful lot of autonomy at the local level. As we've seen in the United States from diocese to diocese, the same is true from country to country.
Do you look at this, though, as an American priest and say, come on, this is deja vu, we managed this nearly 2 decades ago?
There's been a lot of deja vu, but I think what I'm trying to look at it as maybe a little bit of hope that what we've learned in the United States, what we've been trying to implement in the United States, doesn't have to be reinvented in every different culture, that they can take things that would work and maybe invent some new things that then can come back to us.
Why are we hearing, I was on that plane coming back from Panama with the Holy Father and heard him say those words that the expectations for this meeting had been inflated and should be deflated. This is a church that has announced this meeting back in September, has been talking about this meeting, the summit, as a very important part of dealing with this issue of clerical sex abuse, and now you hear the boss of the whole thing, the Pope, saying, oh, let's deflate expectations?
I suspect part of it, to try and put an interpretation on the Pope's words, is the bark of St. Peter is very big. It's a huge ship. Turning it in a direction or another takes a little bit of time. To expect everything to be resolved in 3 days would be maybe too much expectation. But this can be a way of saying, this is our desire, this is our goal, this is our mission, now let's start to work on it. I think the fact that the organizing committee is staying after indicates that they know that this is just the beginning.
There's been a lot of talk about that, of follow-up. Even we heard Charles Scicluna, the Archbishop of Malta, on Monday addressing the media saying follow-up here will be key. We can't, the Pope has said it as well, we can't solve all of these problems. What kind of follow-up can we expect?
Well, I suspect that a lot of it will be maybe less visible, where these are the presidents of bishops' conferences. They have to go back and basically bring the message to the bishops in their countries and basically say, okay, we have to put together something that will respond to these demands from the Pope, these guidelines. And we have to put it together in our context, in the context of our laws, of our countries, and then bring them back and get them approved.
So there are bishops here meeting very near to where we're standing at the moment who do not believe clerical sex abuse is an issue?
I would suspect that, like many people, the initial thing is to say, oh, it's not happening in my backyard. I don't want to talk about it. I think that's something that we've experienced in the United States. The initial reaction to something so horrible is denial. And I suspect, even though we've been in this place for so long, there are still people who would like to believe that it all is happening in the United States and Western Europe, instead of realizing that this is something that touches human nature.
And in just a moment, you're in a classroom here. How is this sexual abuse crisis affecting your life as a priest, as a professor?
Well, I think it's changed the nature of the way we prepare people for priesthood. I think it's changed the nature of the way we deal with people. We have to be a lot more careful. I think there's a certain amount of fear, but there's also a desire to learn what signs to keep an eye out for. One of the best things is having a protocol, so if we see something, if we are suspicious, we have some place to go to, some place to report. That may be the essential part of this meeting.
All right, Father Mark Lewis, thanks very much for joining us live here for CBSN. Before we bring in our next guest, who is Sean Daugherty, we wanted to play a little tape to prepare you for who he is. He is an abuse survivor who my colleague Nicky Batiste has done some fantastic reporting alongside for the last number of months. And there is quite a revealing moment here, quite a provocative moment that Nicky caught on tape. We want to play a portion of that piece.
I'm certainly sorry for any harm I've caused and ashamed of everything that I did back then.
Nearly 4 decades ago here in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, Koharchik was teaching and coaching sports at a Catholic grade school.
Is this around the age the abuse began?
Yeah.
That's when he took an interest in a pair of 10-year-old friends, Sean Daugherty and Brian Sabo.
This is the first time you're talking about your story publicly.
Mm-hmm.
What's the process that got you to this point?
I think just the support of family, my wife, just constantly reassure me I haven't done anything wrong.
We were confused. I mean, he's the priest. Not that any other adults at your age would bathe you in a shower, but he did it like in a joking way. Like, oh, let me get your bag, you know. So, I mean, there's certain things that you just keep private.
But they wanted everything to be public now, as they contacted Koharchik to arrange a sit-down.
What does he hope to gain from meeting Sean and I after all these years? I hope it's not to ask for forgiveness. You know, I don't think his soul can be saved now.
Is there any part of you that forgives him?
No.
I forgive him. If he's willing to...
You forgive him?
I've forgiven him a long time ago.
Is that for you or is that for him?
I think both. I think tonight is for me. How you doing? Have a seat.
As they met face-to-face with the admitted child abuser, both had plenty of questions.
At any point, when you first started having those feelings, did you feel like, should I talk to someone, or?
And that's not the sort of thing where you're going to call the bishop up and say, anything about it, because then... That's good. Thank you. Then you run the risk of, being, dismissed or whatever.
Was there something else about Sean and I that made us a target?
Well, it was the familiarity, maybe. You were close, you were involved in the things that were going on at the church.
Is this something that you would have confessed in a confessional?
Oh, I have, absolutely. But
do you think that's forgiven you?
Yeah.
But Koharchik claimed he didn't know who in the church may have been aware of his behavior.
You didn't get transferred for sexually abusing kids?
I don't think so.
I felt like there was a lot of dancing.
A lot of dancing, feeling out.
He just would not admit that there's any kind of cover-up at all.
How are you feeling?
Good. Yeah, that was hard. That was really hard. I came here not knowing what to expect, but when I wake up tomorrow morning, I'm going to feel really glad I did this.
Relieved?
Yeah.
I got a lot off my chest that I never thought that I'd get off my chest. I mean, I just successfully met with the guy that abused me and got to say everything that I wanted to say to him. Got it off my chest, and I'm at peace right now. I'm completely at peace.
Very emotional stuff, very difficult to watch. I remember watching that for the first time on television as you and Nicky did that piece. Now we have Sean Daugherty with us here in Rome. You have traveled here as one of the abuse survivors. You were one of a dozen people to meet with that organizing committee yesterday on the eve of the opening of the summit, really setting the stage for what's happening here at the Vatican. Take us inside that meeting. How was that?
It was a good meeting. You know, looking back in previous meetings as a victim, when I heard about these meetings, I always was a little skeptical. Like, who are the victims that they're choosing? Who is choosing these victims?
What's the answer?
They are very frank meetings. Yesterday's meeting was, I don't know what the other meetings were, but I know for a fact, for survivors everywhere, that was no fluff and circumstance meeting as far as the victims went. We went in, we were very respectful, not as much reverence, but very frank and matter of fact.
What did you say? What did you want your message to be? It must have given it a lot of thought.
I did, and mine is more of a business background than a background of faith. I lost my faith. I don't know that I ever had faith. I was abused at 10 years old. However, I am one of 9 Catholic children born in a very Catholic family. We never missed Mass, never missed a day of holy obligation, and I pointed out to the committee that whether you like it or not, the Roman Catholic Church is just no longer the most powerful entity on earth. That belongs to social media now. And social media is demanding that we do something about this. And the numbers and the percentage and the polls all tell me as a business person, and the fact that only one of my siblings goes to church and none of their children go to church tells me that within 1 or 2 generations, my mother's generation, that in the United States, the church is the largest landholder. And if they do not get ahead of this now and moving forward forever, in the United States, my personal belief is we are about to have the largest yard sale in American history.
We were watching this piece, this clip of this piece, about this 3-minute piece. It's heart-wrenching to watch you confront your abuser. It's heart-wrenching to hear these stories. We know that video testimony has been played. Bishops were encouraged to meet with abuse survivors before even coming to Rome. With all understanding of how horrible these stories are, haven't these bishops heard this before, and how do you get through to them?
My personal bishop, Bishop Mark Barczyk of the Altoona Johnstown Diocese, I willingly went and met on 4 different occasions before the Pope instructed the bishops to meet. I initiated the meeting. I went to 4 meetings. I poured my heart out. I have over 10.5 hours of meetings with Bishop Mark Barczyk. I begged, I pleaded, I offered to sit on his review board moving forward. I have done everything I possibly can do. My last meeting with Mark Barczyk was in January of 2018, and in August 2014, the Attorney General handed me a report that he was named in from the Erie Diocese when he was Monsignor Barczyk. So, I mean, if all the bishops are named in a grand jury report and they're to meet survivors, what is that going to do? How am I supposed to trust Mark Barczyk? He didn't tell me that he's going to be named in this report when I met with him on 4 occasions. How am I supposed to go back to Mark Barczyk and think for a second that I can trust what he's going to say to me?
What would you like to see come out of this? We hear the Pope saying more than condemnation, we want concrete action for you. What would satisfy you? What would say this trip to Rome, to the Vatican, was worth it?
I think more than to satisfy me, to satisfy everyone that I represent. And I represent not just victims, I represent my family, my faithful mother, who committed and offered her entire life to this church, longer than I've been alive. I would like to see the bishops come out of that conference, go right down there in St. Peter's Square, prostrate themselves to the world, tell them that they are heartfully sorry, then follow with, on this date and this time. This is a huge organization. I don't think they're just going to walk out on Monday and say we have the fix. But on this date and this time, the world will have every single document in our possession on sexual assault of children.
Asking for transparency. That is one of the themes, certainly, that we have been told to expect here. Sean Daugherty, thanks for talking with us, and thanks for sharing your story. It's those human stories that are at the core of all of this, the reason these 190 people, 114 or so bishops from around the world have come. One of the questions before we get to our next guest, who is Father Bob Gall, is the Pope, the man at the center of all of this, is he capable of guiding this? He is a man who's gone through great transformation in the last year in his approach toward the clerical sex abuse crisis. And we want to show you a piece we've been working on, which we have called What Did the Pope Know?
Pope Francis himself said expectations for the summit should be deflated. This after the Vatican billed it for months as a vital part of the Church's effort to protect minors and standardize its response to clerical sex abuse allegations.
In most parts of the world, this is something that people become aware of just now. And
Hans Zollner is part of the organizing committee. We sat down with him after the summit was announced in the wake of sex abuse scandals in Chile, Australia, Germany, the Netherlands, and that Pennsylvania grand jury report.
This shows that we are at the core of things, and it is good and necessary that it happens.
This is a good thing that all of this is coming out?
Oh yes, it is good in that sense that this has been brooding, and this had been lingering.
Pope Francis says he has zero tolerance for sex abusers in church ranks. But in 2007, the pontiff created a special post for Argentinian Bishop Gustavo Zanqueta, who is now under investigation for sexual abuse. They were really good friends, Juan Jose Manzano said. The Vatican says it only learned of Zanqueta's misbehavior in late 2018. But Manzano, Zanqueta's deputy, was among those who alerted the Vatican in 2015 and 2017 that the bishop had taken naked selfies, exhibited obscene behavior, and was accused of sexual misconduct with seminarians. Both times, Manzano says, the Pope summoned Zanqueta to Rome. His Holiness Pope Francis called him, Manzano said, and told him, look, you are sick. Before becoming Pope, Francis claimed in a book he co-wrote that he knew of no cases of clerical sex abuse in the archdiocese he oversaw. But a parishioner there, Beatriz Barela, says that's not true. She says her son Gabriel was abused by a priest at age 15 in the archdiocese that he oversaw, and she was never allowed to meet Francis. He's only a pope of marketing, Gabriel added. In the fall, the Pope publicly apologized for initially standing by a Chilean bishop who was later found guilty of witnessing and ignoring abuse.
He admitted that he made a mistake. And that was what at least many of the survivors from Chile really appreciated.
Zollner admitted the Pope had a steep learning curve, but has taken action, including removing American Theodore McCarrick from the College of Cardinals, and later defrocking him.
We see what is happening over the last year, since the Me Too movement in the US started, that the untouchables are not untouchable anymore. And this pertains also to bishops, to cardinals, and to the Pope himself.
As the sun sets behind us here at the Vatican, an absolutely stunning backdrop. Hard to imagine that this is a church in many ways that is in crisis. We bring in now Father Bob Gall, an American who's an associate professor of ethics at Santa Croce, the Pontifical University here in Rome. Also a very good friend to CBS. Thanks for talking with us. After this piece we just heard, does the Pope have the credibility to be at the forefront of this, to be leading these meetings?
Really, his track record is mixed, and this, in a sense, is a sign of encouragement. Because
how can it be encouragement?
It's encouragement because in the past he suddenly changed, and he's shown when he was mistaken, and he was blatantly mistaken. All of a sudden, he turned around, and then it was clear that he got it. So many people. We also have this confidence from a faith perspective that he has the help of God, and we have the confidence that he's listening to the Holy Spirit. So let's hope for a turnaround. That's my position.
But he is an 82-year-old man at the very top of this church. How can, with all due respect, some of these things sound so tone deaf? How can he at first side with a predator priest and against victims in Chile?
As we were heading into the summit, it looked at times as though it was all a smokescreen. To some people, it still looks like maybe this is just show. And yet, this morning, Pope Francis, he began by saying we need a real concrete result. We need to have new protocols. And he came out and he distributed those 21 points that you mentioned. And this increased my hope. But let's see what happens tomorrow, which is a day dedicated to accountability. And then the next day to transparency. And hopefully there will be an opening to really bring in a greater role of the laity.
A lot of those 21 points that we were discussing in the beginning also with Father Lewis, those are quite familiar to an American priest. The rest of the world is playing catch up here?
Well, there's something that's, I think, deeper going on here with this whole, in a sense, the show, this summit. But it's more than a show. It's also a prayer exercise. These 190 religious superiors who have come in, Pope Francis is trying to get them to be sensitive to the Holy Spirit, sensitive to the Church's needs, and ready to make a change. He's directing them towards a conversion. So we're going to find out within a few hours, is this really a moment of conversion for Pope Francis and for the Church to really allow this accountability where the information is going to be out there and they will be relying upon the lay people who are also bringing the denunciations, but are also bringing recommendations also regarding who are going to be the next generation of bishops. Are we going to have another McCarrick, or instead are the lay people going to have a stronger role, and also the priests and the seminarians in recommending who will be the leaders of the Church tomorrow?
And how do you change the system so that it doesn't allow another McCarrick, or are there other McCarricks in there now?
So this is really interesting because Archbishop Scicluna, who spoke this morning, he understands, let's say, the Anglosphere, the Anglophone. He's a jurist. He studied law in college and he speaks English.
For 10 years, he was the top sex crimes investigator of the Vatican.
Exactly, and he's been sent on these special missions by Pope Francis. He's really trusted by Pope Francis. Well, he brought up some very specific points in his speech this morning, and then he engaged them in the questions. It was very open dialogue, and in part of that, he did speak about the appointment of bishops and how we need new procedures involving the laity to a greater extent. This is already required by canon law. It's specified that the apostolic nuncios are in the capital city of each country, that they listen to the laity, but they often don't. Hopefully they'll listen to Archbishop Scicluna.
As the sirens go by here and remind us we're in the middle of the city of Rome. What does the U.S. Catholic Church stand to gain? Is this just kind of the model now everybody is going to follow, and the U.S. doesn't have much to get out of these meetings?
Well, of course, around the world there's so much diversity. Every country's in a different situation. The United States, we're tired of this. And we're tired of the scandal and the crisis. And it's more than a crisis. It's now the cover-up is the crisis, more than the sexual abuse itself. It's the cover-up done by bishops. So we're hoping that other countries can learn from the United States, that the Holy Father can learn from the United States. And given this listening session is hopefully more than just dialogue, hopefully it's going to lead to some real conclusions to be activated. And I think a number of the players who are involved in the conference, including at the end of the conference, the last two people who speak are lay women who are both quite talented and outspoken. And I'm hoping that they will also be listening and then communicate the needs of the universal church, but also relying upon the experience that we've had in the United States that offers a special wisdom to the world.
Just very briefly, we're told not to expect a document at the end of this. What do you want to see? What will you be listening for on Sunday to say, aha, they've done something, or maybe not?
Well, I'm happily surprised that we have a document at the beginning that we weren't expecting. I'd like another one at the end, in addition to the Pope's recommendations. And I would like it to specify what is going to be done to those bishops who have already been found to be responsible, but not through some kind of court of laws, through some kind of criminal trial, and that they be held accountable, and that the lay people be involved in this process. That's what I would really like to see.
Perfect. Father Bob Gall, thank you very much. Those are terms that we keep hearing, Vlad, here. A lay oversight on the outside, lay people, not clerics, looking out over some of these processes. Also accountability and transparency. Those, as we've been reporting and as we've talked about, Vlad, are certainly themes here, words that we keep hearing. I guess we will see, are they just words, or will they be what the Pope has asked for, concrete measures? Vlad?
Yeah, Seth, some really compelling, fascinating interviews. And I have a question, because we know the Catholic Church has said to keep expectations low for the summit. But now that we know the Pope is extending the summit into next week, does that show how serious the Church is taking this crisis?
Well, to not overstate it, certainly you can tell the Church is taking this very seriously, but he has asked a handful of people to stay behind for a couple of days to discuss it. He hasn't asked for everyone to stay, so I don't think we can read too much into that, other than to say that this follow-up is going to be really important. But that is something that we have been hearing all along. But one thing, Vlad, I have not been here to cover a conclave, the changing, the fine Pope, but I am told that the public relations apparatus around this meeting is unlike anything people who have covered this much longer than I have ever seen. We have people who are standing by to of language in the press department. There is a dedicated website coming. So the real question here is this more than public relations? The Church is certainly preparing for as much coverage as they can possibly get and to be seen as trying to tackle this issue.
Seth, thank you so much for providing us some real insight and in-depth coverage of this historic summit. I was looking at all the other screens that we have here in the newsroom, as you know, at CBS News, and I couldn't see anybody doing what we're doing here. So this was really sort of an exclusive that we were offering to our viewers. I appreciate it, and please thank all the guests that you had to interview. Really compelling stuff. We appreciate it.